Chapter 2. Ghosts of the Past. The sun hung low at the edge of the horizon, casting long shadows that stretched like fingers over the town of Dust Hollow. Its whispers rustled through the dry grass and prickly brush, a flat, parched land that was as unforgiving as it was beautiful. The air was thick with the smell of sun-baked earth and the distant tang of smoke from the cook fires of the scattered homesteads. A decade washed away under the relentless light of a western sun since Caleb Marshall had hung up his Colt revolvers, but even now, the shadows of that life danced along the dusty streets. His days had dwindled down to tending a few head of cattle, mending fences, and watching the sunset with only the ghosts of his past for company. He was nothing more than a memory in a town that had all but forgotten his name. "Yo, Marshall!" It was Toby, a young buck with hair like kindling and a smile wide enough to hide a handful of trouble. He stood outside the saloon, yellow teeth flashing as he waved. "You comin' to see the show tonight?" Caleb trained his tired gaze on the boy, squinting against the sunlight that dapples the boardwalk. "You mean Missy's lil' singing contest?" He huffed, shaking his head. "Ain't nothing I'd want to see. She's just looking for coin." "Come on, old man. It'll be fun," Toby laughed, slipping a coin between his fingers. "You remember when she sang that song? 'My love is like a river'? Made the whole place feel like summer." Caleb chuckled softly, though it was mingled with a hint of regret. "Yeah, but I also remember when she sang 'I'd Cross the Devil's Canyon' and it almost cost her a fine bit of gold. Don't tell me you're betting on the girl." "But the last time she almost beat out Bart for first," Toby protested. "Besides, it's about time you spent a night out instead of fixin' fences. You ain't no hermit yet." The boy's enthusiasm was contagious, and for a moment, Caleb recalled the young corsair he had been, bold, reckless, always searching for something just out of reach. "Maybe," he replied noncommittally, tapping his fingers against the oak frame of the porch. "But a man's got to be careful when he comes up against the past, boy. It has a way of catching up with you when you least expect it." "Ain't nothing gonna catch you, Marshall. You're the quickest." "Quickest don't mean much to a man who's put down the guns," Caleb interrupted, his words gravely. "That life left me with scars that ain't just skin deep, Toby. Best to leave it behind." As the boy ran off down the street, Caleb leaned against the porch railing, letting the gentle breeze touzle his hair. But the wind also carried echoes of gunfire and shouts, memories that burned hotter than the sun and tugged at the corners of his mind. He closed his eyes. The memories surged back, vivid as though they had occurred only yesterday. "Caleb, watch your back!" The voice of Ruth echoed through the dust-laden air, a warning he'd long forgotten, but one that returned with fevered clarity. He'd been charging forward, gun drawn, innocence far behind him as he faced the gang. The sun hung high, and the shadows were stretched out like the hands of death waiting to grab him. They'd been holed up in the abandoned barn just outside Podunk Pass, a gang of outlaws ready to make their next move. "This town ain't big enough for our kind," their leader, a man known only as Rook, had hissed with a smirk, revealing crooked teeth and a heart filled with malice. "What you gonna do about it, old man?" he taunted. The memory flashed vivid, the smell of gunpowder mingling with sweat and the clamminess of fear. Caleb's finger tightened around the trigger, but instead of squeezing, he hesitated, faced with the eyes of desperation belonging not only to hardened outlaws, but also to innocents stuck in between. Gunshots erupted, sound whittling away the air and tightening the world around him. Caleb had fired back, the thunder of his revolver answering Rook's challenge. "Ya need to think twice for making threats in my town," he had yelled, rage overcoming the apprehension of stepping back into violence. The hours stretched long, and with each echoing shot, he counted the fall of men who had long forsaken their humanity for greed. By the evening his guns lay silent, the barn turned into a quiet tomb, grisly shapes scattered amidst the straw, the old haunt of adults that once knew laughter, now soaked in blood and regret. Ruth, with her fiery hair and a heart too full for miscreants, stood beside him long after the dust settled. "What have you done?" she had whispered, touching the gently trembling hands that held his guns, his hands that had become all too adept at destruction. Her voice trembled as she brushed the dirt from his cheek, eyes wide with worry, even if they burned with something else he couldn't name. "This ain't just a fight, Caleb. You're drawing a line. I do what needs to be done, he replied, his heart clanging against the bars of responsibility, harsh like iron. The night fell, draping heavy sheets over their heads, while Caleb's heart twisted. The kiss of fate had sealed their journey together from that point on, but it was fragile. She had pulled away more than once. Lines etched by his past tugged at the love that had just begun to bloom. Ruth's look, shadowed in memories, returned with weight years later, lingering now like the scent of gunpowder that would never wash away. The veins of Dust Hollow twisted through both time and sorrow. "Mr. Marshall," a voice broke through his reverie, pulling Caleb back to the present. It was Miles Harper, the town's sheriff, his uniform a bit too tight and stained with coffee spills. "We need to talk." "Something got you rattled, Miles," Caleb said, forcing his voice to remain steady. He wondered if it was too much coffee or something worse gnawing at the boy's insides like rats in an attic. Miles stood with his hands fidgeting, and Caleb felt a surge of concern. "It's the Sainsbury gang," Miles muttered, glancing over his shoulder. "They rode in not more than an hour ago. Looks like they're making a mess of things again." Caleb frowned. "What's their business this time?" He folded his arms over his faded denim shirt, feeling the growl of old instincts rising. The Sainsbury gang had long been notorious for troublemaking, but it had been years since anyone had stood up to them seriously. They've been holding sway over the canteen, pushing folks around. Took a few of Old Man Hennigan's cattle, too. You know how it goes, the folks are scared. Ain't nobody got the guts to stand up to 'em. Except you, I reckon. Caleb's tone was flat. A bit like a cornered jackrabbit, are you? Listen, Miles pressed, seemingly trying to pull his thoughts together. I don't know how you did it back in the day, but now I don't want to confront 'em alone. You were the best gunslinger in the West. If you could. Put that life back on the table. Caleb interrupted, his voice a murmur, laced with promise and dread. Dust swirled in the corners of his mind, thickening a tapestry he thought he'd left untouched. That's exactly what I'm asking, Caleb. For the town's sake, at least. We can't let those bastards just roll over us. You know the danger is there for you, too. I've got to put my trust in you, Miles said, his voice shaking with a sense of urgency. You're our only hope. Caleb stared further down the road, where the sun began its descent, extending fiery tendrils across the sky. The shadows began to lengthen, and memories fought against him, pulling him into the rough embrace of his past. Don't seem like there's much gold left in fighting back, Sheriff. Maybe not gold, Miles sighed heavily, but the right side of justice. Maybe a piece of your soul. And for the town, more than just mere self-preservation. Isn't that worth a man putting his boots back on? A man's boots might be the heft of his ghosts instead, Caleb replied quietly. In that moment, a figure rode into the dusk, silhouetted against the twilight. Dust kicked up behind them as they approached, emboldened in a manner Caleb recognized too well, trouble wrapped in leather. The unmistakable shadow cast by the Sainsbury gang. They were here, and with them came the weight of choices, of battles long fought. His heart raced, leaving behind echoes of a different life, a life he thought he couldn't return to but perhaps had no choice. Maybe, Caleb finally spoke, returning his gaze to the sheriff. Maybe it's time to remind the past that I ain't done yet. As Miles nodded, Caleb felt the pulling at the corners of his lips, a grim smile surfacing through the rising anticipation that roiled in the pit of his stomach. Dust Hollow had given him a quiet life, but as any gunslinger would know, the quiet often breeds the loudest of storms. The ghosts would rise again, and he wasn't sure whether that was a blessing or a curse. Caleb Marshall turned toward the chaos on the road, the fading warmth of the sun igniting the fire that flickered within him. Let's get ready then. Ain't gonna wait for them to come for us. In the twilight, the town of Dust Hollow seemed to hold its breath, waiting for the return of its gunslinger. One last time, he picked up his past and loaded it into the chambers of his mind. It was all that remained now. As Caleb stepped into the shadows, he finally understood that facing ghosts could lead to the dawn of hope. Sometimes, just sometimes, even with one last bullet left.